All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here for today's event. We'll go ahead and get started in like 60 seconds. Um, if you have something to write with or write on, that's great. If you don't, I encourage you to find something to write with or write on. Um, we'll be returning to those things throughout today's session. So we'll get started in about 60 seconds. And I'm super excited to be here with you all. All right. I think it's that time. Um, yeah. Um, Thank you all for being here on this Saturday afternoon. My name is Barry. My pronouns are they slash them. And this is What Have You Done with My Body, God? Um, a dramatic name for what I think is an important conversation to begin. And I'm glad that you all are here to begin it with me and with the folks who I'll be speaking with for this first part of the event. So, just to recount, this event is in two parts. The first part, which goes from 3 to 5 p.m., is going to be a sort of roundtable situation where I'll be talking with Jade Sharon, Estrella, Zena Bibler, Gregory Barnett, and Dixon Lee. I will introduce them all in a little while, and then we'll have a break from 5 to 6 p.m. And from 6 to 7:30 is when the folks who are here together will be talking amongst yourselves, with us, with each other. Um, but yeah, before we get started, just once again, I want to say if you don't have something to write with or write on, I encourage you to get those things because we're going to be writing down thoughts that we have related to the things that we're talking about today. I also want to point out that the chat and all that stuff can get kind of confusing to like keep track of. So we've created a Google Doc where people can drop thoughts um, as the talk unfolds. I'll put the link in the chat here. Just know that even though it's anonymous, public facing wise, the people who are editing the document can see who's written what. We're not intending to spill any tea or whatever, but just be aware that the information is not completely anonymous. But please, we encourage you to share whatever thoughts you have about these topics as they unfold, and the intention is to share this information publicly as sort of an archive of some of the thoughts that come up during the event. Also, yes, thank you, Stacy. Incognito tabs is a great way um, to keep things under wraps as well if you want to contribute to this document. Okay, as we get started, I want to encourage you, if you aren't already, to find a place where you can ground. And by ground, I mean you can either sit on the floor, you can stand, making sure that you feel your feet in connection with the ground. Anything that allows you to feel a solid connection with the ground. If you can find that place for yourself, I encourage you to do that now if you haven't already. We'll be returning to the idea of grounding throughout today's talk because I think it's an important aspect of one of the many things that I hope we discuss today. But take some time to do that for yourself now if you need to, and I'll just give a few moments. Okay. Another thing that will come through or come to throughout today's event is the idea of breathing and the importance of taking a breath. Um, I want to start by naming a few of the things that brought us to this moment. But one of the first things I want to name, or one of the first people I want to name, is Jade Perry. Um, they are a contemplative and spiritual activist who is developing this idea of rhythm over time, right? So as opposed to setting up a discrete block of time and then saying, this is 10 minutes, this is 20 minutes, this is 30 minutes, they talk a lot about feeling the rhythm of an event as it unfolds. And I think one of the ways we can practice that is by taking breaths intermittently throughout this talk and really throughout anything. So as we go, I'll encourage or invite people to take a breath. I don't want to be coercive, so it's not like you have to breathe or else, but when we get to those points, I invite you to take a breath just to punctuate things as they happen. And I think it's a good way to start. So let's go ahead and take a breath together in through our noses and out through our mouths. And in this place of grounding, one of the first things that I want to name um, in this feeling of groundedness is something that a lot of somatic practitioners talk about, which is a pleasant sensation beneath the waist. It doesn't have to be sexual. It can be. It's not required to be. But where your stomach is, where your intestines are, where your rectum and anus are, where your genitals are, you can allow all of these things to settle and relax, to just be held. This place beneath the belly button is also where several thousand nerve endings come together in our bodies. So giving them a relaxed support is important to what we'll be doing and talking about today. As we begin, there are a list of things that I want to name, things that are catalysts for this discussion that we're having today. First, I would like to name that this is an event that is for quote unquote dancers. And by dancers, I mean people who use their bodies as a primary channel for expression or making or doing or teaching. I want to name that this event came together as a result of many conversations and encounters and experiences that I've had with dance people, especially over the past couple of years. Um, I want to name that a lot of dancers are tired in many ways, um, whether that is emotionally, mentally, physically, or some combination of the three. People are hurt emotionally, physically, and mentally. And a lot of dancers have either hit a wall with the work that they're doing, or are very frustrated about processes that they've been in where they've been exploited or abused, underpaid, taken advantage of, a myriad of things that have sort of compromised people's investments in dance. And quite a few people are actually walking away from the field So that's one thing I want to name as something that compelled me to bring this together today. I want to name that today's discussion is revolving around this thing called concert dance, and specifically this thing called postmodern concert dance, which means a million different things to a million different people. And I want to honor that as well. People are coming to this conversation with completely different starting points and completely different aims. Some folks want to make careers in concert dance. Some people say they're concert dancers in order to get money to do what they do, and some people are somewhere in between. I think all of those options are valid and great. I want to name that this talk is hopefully part of a conversation that is happening now, especially that a lot of venues for teaching dance, presenting dance, and making dance are currently shut down or in limbo or trying to figure out how to change form. Uh, and lots of different kinds of conversation have happened and are happening around what dance is. And these conversations predate this moment. I'm thinking of conversations that are responding to movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too. Conversations where dancers have some room to air the frustrations that I just mentioned. I also want to name that institutions and individuals, be they choreographers, teachers, presenters, etc., a lot of people have committed to not changing anything, and some people have committed to trying to change things. Um, but I want to name that a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, though those things are important, um, they all revolve around this idea of representation. Who's in the room, who's on stage, what's on syllabus. All of those things are important, but I believe they miss something vital about our engagement with dance and performance, and that has to do with something that's a really important foundation of dominance, resistance, and liberation today, which is what our bodies are, how we understand them, and what we actually use them to do. So I hope that today's conversation can help us think about what bodies are, how we understand them, and what we use them to do. I want to name that a lot of dominant understandings of what a body is are rooted in a centuries-long history of anti-Blackness, anti-Black violence, beginning with chattel slavery, that really had a lot of development through the medical industrial complex, is still alive and well through the prison industrial complex and many other things. But the idea of a body as something that's separate from a person, a body that's something that you have to train, a body that's something that is unhealthy or has to be turned into something else. These ideas are largely but not exclusively informed by a history of anti-Blackness, and I want to name that. Similarly, I want to name that a lot of entitlements to space, space to work in, space to show dance, space to do this thing called concert dance. A lot of these understandings are largely but not exclusively rooted in histories of indigenous erasure and the very real act of clearing out space so that we can have room to do what we would like to. I want to name that as well. One of the last things I want to name is what we call somatic practices, these practices that are aimed at undoing a lot of these older things, of understanding how our bodies work and how we can be in a more harmonious, say, relationship to them. A lot of these practices are rooted largely in South and East Asian systems of thought, um, either explicitly, whether it's something like Qigong or Tai Chi, or by means of borrowing through Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, body-mind centering, so on and so forth. So I mention all of these things not to raise the question of cultural appropriation. Is it good? Is it bad? Also an important topic. But I just want to name that when we talk about what a body is, how we understand it, and what it does, what we are actually dealing with is the fact that there are many clashing understandings of body and selfhood that are at play. As we, or as our institutions, or as we in our groups try to figure out what performance is going to be and what it already is, I want us to be honest about what could potentially be abusive, what could be liberatory, what could be somewhere in between or ambivalent. And I also want us to realize that just because we might be experimental in what we do, it doesn't mean that we are actually working for liberation. Experimentation and liberation aren't the same thing. So I want us to use this time to ask, what is it that we are actually doing when we claim to explore, experiment, or do something new with dance? I invite you to go ahead and take another breath for yourself, and find this grounding feeling for yourself once again. Now that I've laid out this collection of things that I wanted to name, before we get into our talk, I just want to give a brief spiel about some of the more concrete events that sort of led us to this moment. And hopefully this won't take too long. This is not the Barry show, but I think it's important to have context about where this is all coming from. So the topics of embodiment, sovereignty, and spirituality, which we'll get into, are probably fresh on a lot of people's minds right now. The January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. brought them vividly to life as people answered Trump's dog whistle, in quotes, dog whistle call to disrupt the country's electoral process. One of that event's most prominent figures was the so-called QAnon shaman, which I'm sure many people saw the pictures. On my content feeds, his face paint, tacky furs, and antlers, along with his screaming face, emblematized the so-called alt-right / fascist movement's penchant for being loud and wrong. The insurrection was a threat, so many people seem to argue, because it represented the violent incursion of deranged thinking into the literal center of American politics. What often gets lost in thinking about the January 6th event is that there's a history and a context to these events. I think we should remember that a lot of this online planning, online conspiracy theory, a lot of this activity really started around the year 2013 after Obama got a second term in office, and after digital platforms like Twitter became important centers for activist action. So for instance, Black Lives Matter galvanized a lot of action through Twitter, right? The hashtag was invented to be used on Twitter. At the same time, growing numbers of disgruntled internet users began plotting strategies for fighting what they believed was a leftist violation of their right to exist. A lot of these people were cis white men, though not exclusively, and I think that's important to name too. On sites like 4chan, domestic terrorists orchestrated attacks against digital activism, particularly among Black feminists. Bots and real people created several social media accounts dressing themselves with the pictures, language, and follower lists of a stereotypical angry Black feminist, in quotes. And as planned, those accounts sowed discord among Black activist circles, often sabotaging activist coordination in the process. Many Black women documented and reported this abuse to companies like Twitter and Facebook, but they were ignored. What the trolls set out to do, however, they accomplished. They developed and expanded divide and conquer techniques that they tried out on Black activists, mostly with the intent of swaying the outcome of the US 2016 presidential election. And I'm sure many people have heard about this. Together with the efforts of the Russian Internet Research Agency, domestic terrorists successfully plowed social media with enough disinformation to make Trump a wildly popular candidate in many people's eyes. Why is this important? A lot of people say that because of all this activity, we currently live in a post-truth era, quote unquote, where information from many different uh, areas of the political spectrum have, quote unquote, equal amounts of currency, right? Um, Something that's important is that the phrase post-truth is a phrase that conservatives have often used to talk about leftist activism, whether it happens among activists who are working in the street or in the academy where people are critiquing dominant narratives of how culture, society, and politics work. And this has been going on, particularly since the 1990s, but even further back, right? Um, One of the more recent waves was with the emergence of movements like Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, Me Too, and also the mainstreaming of so-called social justice rhetoric. What's important here is that a lot of different people, so not just leftists and not just fascists, but a lot of different people assume a skeptical relationship to dominant narratives. A lot of people use the language of radical politics to further their agendas. So the question is not what is true or not true, but instead, why do people connect the dots between pieces of information in a given way? What is at stake in our processes of making meaning? I don't think it's a mistake that spirit and spirituality enter this conversation because when people, as we've seen, if truth is not a source that people can rely on, often something bigger, something larger, larger kinds of activity become the thing that people use to explain what is ordering the world. Um, Whether that's something like QAnon, where a lot of people are yoga practitioners or some kind of New Age practitioner, and also anti vaxxers and anti maskers, or you have people who are rediscovering indigenous wisdom, rediscovering African traditional religions and spiritualities, right? In both of these cases, people are returning to spirituality as a way to explain something about how the world works. And in returning to spirituality, the body often becomes the thing that is the most precious and important in determining who a person is and how they exist in this world. I mention all those things not just to say that spirituality is like a metaphor that people use, but I think it's a really important part of what politics is today. I won't go too far into this topic of cultural somatics, but a lot of people are addressing this idea that bodies are not just an important part of culture, but cultures have bodies, cultures have nervous systems. Um, in pre-colonial or indigenous settings, people practice this belief as something we might call animism, right? So people are not just people. We're in connection with plants, animals, stones, bodies of water, the environment, ancestors, other deities. All of these things exist together in a body, right? And when that body is injured, either our physical bodies or these larger cultural bodies, that trauma is what registers as oppression and oppressive violence in the world. So when I talk about spirituality, and especially in this context, I'm not talking about something that is woo and scary, though it can be scary. Um, it's also just a way of saying that these invisible connections are real, that we inherit patterns of behavior from the people who came before us, and they impact how we treat one another and also the environment around us. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up so we can get into this talk. I think in postmodern dance, especially since the 1970s, really, the practice of somatics has sort of tapped into all of these things. And the idea has been, oh, if we can reflect on how our bodies work, if we can understand how our bodies work, and if we can develop a harmonious relationship with our bodies, then somehow we can resist these oppressive ways of moving and thinking that we inherit from classical dance, modern dance, etc. But like I've said, and also thinking about thinking back to the themes I've named already. Lots of people are reflecting. Lots of people are curious about bodies. Lots of people believe that, oh, if I have the right relationship to my body, I'm in charge of myself and everything is good. I've seen and witnessed and experienced personally the fact that often in process, dancers are asked to surrender, undo, unlearn, give up. And that becomes a tool for exploiting the things that dancers bring into the rehearsal room, whether that's personal lived experience, whether that's sensitive material of any other kind. And it often leaves people open and vulnerable to a choreographer's authority. I also see that when it comes to different somatics movements, and it's not just somatics, but often these movements offer a lot of wisdom, but they also promote people who are charismatic in a way because they're presumed to have all of this knowledge about bodies that other people somehow don't have. And one really important overlap between those movements and the politics that we're seeing now is galvanizing around a single leader who's charismatic and presumed to be wiser than everyone else. And that enables a lot of potentially cultish behavior and thinking. So as we move into this panel discussion, and we'll have a brief break for a little bit of writing before we move into the discussion, I want us to ask, what is our goal in remaking bodily truths? Because cult behavior can be one outcome, but tapping into the wisdom of our ancestors who lived and died well can also be another outcome. And those things are not the same. So we have to ask what path we're taking to get to those places. Let's go ahead and do a little writing for ourselves. Obviously taking a breath and remembering to ground as we move. The tool or the question that I want to ask as we move into this conversation is, thinking about your work as a body person, as a mover, as a dancer, as a performer, whatever you call yourself, if your work were a tool, what would it be and why? I'll put that in the chat so people can see it. If your work were a tool, what would it be and why? And when I say tool, I don't mean a hammer, a ruler, a saw. It can be those things, but I think of a tool as any object that puts you in intentional relation to a task. So if your work were a tool, what would it be and why? I'll leave like 3 or 4 minutes for folks to jot down answers. And then we'll use this as a springboard into our discussion. And go ahead and take about 1 more minute for yourself to keep writing. And you can keep writing if you want to. You can also find a place to stop if you'd like for now. Um, just to redirect your attention to the chat box, Dixon just posted a link to the Google Doc we have where people are gathering thoughts, collecting thoughts about these topics as we discuss. So if you want to add, once again, I encourage you to add whatever thoughts you might have to this discussion as we go, or this document as we go. Um, I wanted to start with this question of if your work were a tool, what would it be and why? Because I think it's important for us to get real about and understand what metaphors, images, practices, and processes of meaning making we use to get into relationship with our bodies when we summon them to movement. Um, Also, I think this question is just fun. So I'm super excited to see what the people on this panel have answered when it comes to this question. Very briefly, I just want to introduce the folks who are here. I'm super excited to have them. These are all folks who I've worked with in some capacity. And I think they're amazing because in their work, they all address spirit, spirituality, embodiment, agency, some version of all of those things, whether they use those words exactly or not. So I'm super thrilled that they're here. Okay, I will go very quickly. Greg Barnett is, oh gosh, you told me to riff, but I don't. I don't want to riff. But Greg is a performance person who has done a lot of different things, from so-called postmodern dance to performance installations to stripping to Instagram provocateurness, and it is all vital. And I'm super thrilled that he is here with us today. Um, because he's very outspoken about the role of spirit and spirituality in relationship to dance practice and what it is and what it should or should not be. So I'm thrilled to have Greg here. Zena is a dancer and dance researcher who specializes in improvisation. They are currently writing a dissertation about the role of attention in a lot of postmodern improvisation practices. And some of those practices are tangentially related to different forms of spirituality or might involve them. So I'm thrilled to have Zena here. Jade Sharon um, is doing everything: dance, film, community organizing, teaching, choreographing. Um, and I really value Jade's work because she often talks about dance as a form of ministry, and is really bent on making sure that performance is always surrounded by community discussion, platforms for presentation, engagement, education, um, all of that stuff. And she's currently a professor at Medgar Evers College in New York. So I appreciate you for joining us from the East Coast. Oh, and Zena as well. Um, Estrella is a improviser, facilitator, choreographer, spirit worker, also currently based in New York. We met here in LA, but they have been many places, and a lot of their work deals explicitly with ancestry and how movement and performance and a lot of different modalities can be a way of engaging with these things that we inherit from people, but also from the environment around us. Last and certainly not least, we have Dixon. They are currently a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania, who is writing about embodiment, specifically in a dance context, but also relating to some of the legacies of Blackness and anti-Blackness that I mentioned earlier, and thinking about relationships between Blackness and, I think this is accurate, different forms of Asian experience. I don't know if that's like the best wording, but I'll say that. Um, Dixon is also working in a number of modes or media. They are a great writer, but they are also a movement practitioner, and I'm super thrilled to have them here as well. So these are all amazing people. Get to know them. Um, yeah, let's just go into it. I'm curious to hear what you all answered in terms of this question. If your work were a tool, what would it be and why? My personal answer is my work would be a synthesizer, like, like a synthesizer that you play music on, because I love assembling different kinds of information from books, from music, from pictures, from whatever, and sort of like running that through and seeing what comes out as a result of those things. So that's my answer. I'll let y'all chime in however you want in response to this question. Or should I? Oh, I'm going to pick someone actually. Greg, would you mind going first?
Shit. Sure. Uh, I'll just read what I wrote because rewriting it in real time would not work. So, it's a reminder that or if your work were a tool, what would it be and why? It's a reminder that I am not alone. Using my body reminds me that not for lack of trying, that I am not dead yet. Reminds me that others are. It is a tool of listening to whatever happened before me. That my path didn't start in 1982 and it will not stop when I am gone. To make my work about me, about my brain's opinions, is limiting and probably detrimental. If I had to pick a metaphor, in parentheses, if I believed in metaphors, I am a compost heap at best. There is a backlog of processing my family never got to, and I'll do what I can until I stop. Amen, I'm sorry, and I love you. Thank you.
Um, cool. I will, you know what? I will step out of the way. I'll let folks answer as they will.
Okay, I can go. So, hi, I'm Jade again. I wrote that the tool will be water. My work will be seen as water. To submerge doubt, to test faith, to live in truth, to float, to baptize, to cleanse, to flow, to have no ending. And I need endless possibilities.
Hi, I'm Sadina. Hold on, let me turn on the video there. I just wanted to make a quick technical note. You might want to check if your audio is working. So for instance, Jade, I didn't really hear, there's a lot of distortion, so maybe if you have the microphone closer, that would help. That's all I have to say for now, thanks.
Cool, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Much better, yeah.
Should I repeat? Okay, I'll repeat. I'm good. Okay.
If you want to repeat, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I just said, let me read again. That my tool, that my work would be used as water to submerge doubt, to test faith, to live in truth, to float, to baptize, to cleanse, to flow, to have no ending. Why? Because I need endless possibilities.
I can go next. So as I was thinking about this, I think I would describe, especially my dance work, as a loom. Because in looming, when you're making a tapestry or you're weaving something, you're trying to braid things together to find a pattern. I think I love thinking about a loom because when you're making things, it can be a whole piece by itself, or maybe you're making a piecemeal thing to be connected with something else. You can make something that's useful, like clothing. You can also make something that's totally ornamental, aesthetic, seemingly has no use, but it's loaded with meaning. And then I think the reason I chose the loom was I was also thinking of a couple Greek myths. So Penelope, when she's waiting for Odysseus to come back, is looming, not as a way of killing time, but almost extending a way to be solitary while waiting for something to arrive. I also thought about the myth of Arachne challenging Athena as a weaver, because I think there's something really special about dance work where if you can really hit the nerve correctly, you can feel like you're making something that is more than what the divine or more than what a scripture is telling you is supposed to be possible.
Um, I feel like I will share two things. I made a whole list, but I think the first one is definitely a tarot deck, and then the second one came a bit like closer to the end, where I was like imagining kind of that my tool is a blackout, like going black, going completely dark, and the time that it takes for like the vision to adjust. But then I was really thinking about like everything goes dark, and then incrementally, like something or someone is like turning on and off like a lighter. So something about that.
When I first was thinking about this, I came up with some things that really didn't feel like tools. So I had a junk drawer that you only really find out what's in there like every, I don't know, for me it's like every 15 years, and then you kind of go through it and you're like, oh, when you see some things or you see the objects and they remind you of someone else, or they're not even yours, or like or you see the thing that you actually needed for a really long time but you gave up looking for. So the first thing I had was a junk drawer, and I was like, well, is that a tool? There's lots of tools maybe in there. Yes, I just spilled a giant junk drawer. I was not drunk. But there was literally things from like my toddler years, because I'm living with my family right now, and I was just like, I was in a rush and I was like, I can't deal with it. But anyway, so I think my work is about kind of sitting with the junk drawer and the kind of like brilliance of some things, and the things that are past their use, and then the combinations of things that can happen when you just let the things sit and see light or see space. And then the other thing that I've been working with that helps me deal with my frustration is like when necklaces, you haven't taken them out for a long time, they get really tangled, and like every time you try to untangle them, you just pull it tighter, and like the necklace jumble takes a different form depending on what you pull, but like you don't get any closer to getting them separated. And so you're just there like, ugh. So I'm trying to have peace with like, yeah, but I still have this thing that like I could change its configuration. I can change the relationships between the things. And sometimes if I'm patient enough, I can get them apart. But so when I really was like, no, okay, a tool, I was thinking about like, what am I doing when I'm dancing or when I'm writing for that matter? I think the tool is like a table, and it's a place to dump the junk drawer onto, a place to like get your work light and like get with that necklace. it's a place to arrange things, a place to establish parameters and boundaries and like decide what's going to be dealt with that day, and to know that like I can leave and come back. And then a table also in the way of like being able to be a host. So setting the conditions for something to happen, for the work to happen, and giving me something, and the people that I'm sitting with giving me something to do, like focus on the food, even though what you're really there for is the dialogue. But if you just start straight with the dialogue, sometimes the dialogue can't happen and you have to be doing something else. So sometimes the doing something else is the dancing. And so then I just settled on like, maybe it's a way of being together and like having some parameters and some openness to what kind of relationships could happen and how they might change the shape of things.
Yes, thank you all for these images or these tools. Speaking of movement and change, I'm going to turn on my light just so people can see me as we go. So give me like 2 seconds. Okay. One of the things that I loved about hearing all of these tools is even as folks were explaining them, and for some folks it was really pronounced and for others not so much, but with all of these explanations, there's like there's like the gesture that comes with understanding what the tool is, right? And it can be a literal gesture, but it is also just like a way of moving from, okay, I'm starting this dancing thing, to, okay, there it is. Like there are different gestures that get us from the starting place into dancing, whether that's flowing or untangling or channeling or switching off, right? These are all different ways of setting up your body to be in relationship to whatever the activity is. I want to know if you all have like favorite gestures or favorite tools that you use when you're like, well, shit, I gotta make something, right? Um, and I think this can be like really like, it doesn't have to be abstract, but it can be something like, you know, I make a score, or like I look at these pictures and I like imitate the movements, and that gets me started. Procrastinate. Actually, I do want to hear about this actually. But yeah, I think that's my question is like, what gestures, what tools do you use to like get into doing the thing? And I'm actually, we've talked about the procrastination one, Greg, so I want to hear more about this.
Shit. My favorite gesture is starting everything with shit. Yeah, I think because like the internal dialogue of what might happen in my head is grandiose, if not impossible, in like in a real brick and mortar sense. And so I kind of, if I'm making a solo of something that involves like people watching at a set time, quite often it'll be like, okay, well, here's all these ideas, like this is this really intricate costume I'm going to hand sew. This is this giant set I'm going to make. I'm going to make these like, and intentionally then just think about how it's going to happen without ever doing it. And then usually like, 2 hours before the show, I'm like, fuck, nothing's done. And I like show up like with the plastic bag of like tinsel that I got the day before. And like, maybe the songs that I chose like 2 nights prior. And the idea that like, if what was true 3 months out is probably not true now. And so if I hold to that, if I practice this idea, then basically what I'm creating is a replication of like a moment of time that doesn't resonate with me anymore. But if I can keep the thinking process or keep the listening process going, then by the time I get on stage or whatever, or tune out or whatever it is, whatever pulled me to do it in the first place will still be there, and I won't get distracted by what I think it's turned into, if that makes sense. So the manufacturing of what's inside my head usually is the quickest way for me to steer off path. So I try to trick myself into not doing that by scheduling everything but, and pretending like it's not happening until it's happening. In general.
before the next person talks, and we can do this popcorn style, like jump in, like we don't have to like wait, call hands or anything. But it reminds me of every time you talk about this, I think about Coco Ono and the like smoothie, this smoothie strip where it's like, my task is making a smoothie, but I'm also stripping, but I'm just going to make the smoothie and then I forgot that I have to strip. So there it is.
Yeah, right. Well, it was a weekly show at like midnight, and Coco was always fucking hungry. And so it was always just like we'd finish a show at 10 and we'd be like driving to Venice, and she'd be like, well, I'm going to eat a burrito as I strip tonight because I have to. And like the strip was always about the fact that she couldn't make it till 1:30 without eating. And it's now kind of her thing, but like it was never because like, you know, she had a relationship to food, and like it was literally, she's like, no, I'm hungry and you guys asked me to take my clothes off, so I'm going to accomplish both things, you know, two birds, one stone.
Lately, sorry, I don't know what lately means. I've been interested in starting for some years. I've been interested in starting. I found a way of coping with starting by starting with something that is not possible. And I've realized that what I like about it is that it requires me to like the doing it anyway is somehow the poetry of it. Like it's not possible and I'm going to do it, and I'm forced to reconcile with that. And maybe that's something like faith. And the faith is not like, I believe I can do it. It's like, it's not possible. And here I am trying to do it. So the problem is that sometimes it does become possible. You know, faith, it's powerful. So then I have to make it impossible by adding layers of impossibility that ensure that I can't show something that's finished, or like I can't, that ensures for me that I can't be showing a picture of the thing and I'm showing the thing instead. And this reminds me of a conversation that Darian O'Reilly and I had like 3 years ago. And I was going through it, and I came out with this idea of like, it's like the humiliation of even trying. And I was like, that's my spiritual practice, is the humiliation of even trying. And it's something that is not only dance. It's like the humiliation of even trying to love someone if you know that all attachments end in separation, or like the humiliation of even trying to make a dance when you know that all dances are too long and like who cares and whatever, or the humiliation of even having faith when you may not get an answer. So yeah, like I think impossibility releases me from a need to do it right or make something good or arrive. And I find it's a great like teaching strategy too with the undergrads at UCLA, because they can't, you know, it's not possible. So everyone can just go ahead and work, or not work, but do something.
Yeah, I agree. I've always had a wild imagination, and I could see like visions and ideas that come to me. And like over the summer, I'm like, I'm going to create a Black woman dance superhero, and I didn't even read comic books or anything, but I just had this vision, like, I'm going to do it. It's in the middle of COVID, I don't care. We're going to rehearse with masks on, and I don't have any funding, but we're going to make a film. And I have to, I'm a visual person, so sometimes I storyboard, or sometimes I storyboard with stick figures, but it's clear in my head. And I'm not always articulate in speech, but I know what I see, and I just do. And I've also built a community of people. So I have a set of people that I can talk to about my wildest dreams, and I know they won't deter me. And I'll confide in them. Then I have other friends who are like way more logical, and they'll come on later on in the process. You have to see the thing first. So I usually can find the folks that can touch and agree, as we say in church, Black church I grew up. And when 2 or 3 are gathered, you have those 1 or 2 people who listen to your ideas and speak into them and give you that courage, like, yeah, well, do it. And so that's usually how it's probably always the idea of impossible, and then just get into work. Get into work right away, even if the work isn't complete, because I'm interested in the process of making a thing more than the thing itself. And like I care about product, but I care about how we arrive to the product. And so the research, the embodiment is always the driving force when getting started to do the thing, the art, the work.
I'm thinking a little bit about how, especially when I have to dance, I think the process for me in my mind is about dancing with my backside, or kind of throwing my body ahead of where my mind can follow it. Because if I'm thinking too much about, so this is different, like if I'm in a technique class or something, I'm a little bit more thoughtful about things just because I'm like, I need to know placement, safety, I don't want to injure myself. But when it comes to trying to find dance that isn't about like getting another kind of comportment onto my body, I find my mind just gets so ambitious. It'll get really ambitious. It'll want to do something. It'll want it to be really great. And then immediately it starts to get very doubtful and anxious. um, and then usually if I am sitting too much in my mind, like a period of time where I would want to be dancing just turns into a period of time ruminating about what am I supposed to do. So the process for me involves like trying to just start dancing before my mind can realize that I've started dancing. And then usually if that goes into effect, what I find is my body actually probably wants to ask a different question or find something else out than what my mind wants to. And if I can be in that sort of dance space long enough, at a certain point, I usually feel like my mind is relaxing its grip and it goes out of director or like bad choreographer mode, where it's like, do these steps, follow this score, and it does something that's a little bit more observational. And so in these moments of flow, what's really great is the body is doing something and it affects my mind. So my mind is no longer paying attention to what am I supposed to do, but it's really attuned to like, what's the sensation of time? What's the sensation of place that the body is elaborating? Yeah, and I think those are the moments where I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I like dancing. This is dancing, and this is how it's different from another kind of activity like writing or thinking or talking.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I feel like for me, it's definitely a process of sometimes starting with a question, but then the question either dissolves or like turns into another like series of questions. But and I think like the question, not sometimes it's not even like a written, like it's not even like a question that is written in like a tangible a kind of language, but just maybe the essence of a question or like the resonance of a question or the image of a question. And simultaneously, I have to somehow source and create the conditions for me to feel like I can wander and get lost. And like invite on some level like my inner child or like that sort of like other versions of myself to sort of guide the experience and trajectory, layered with the sensation of like very directly asking my body like, what is it, what do I need today specifically. And I think the conditions of the pandemic, interestingly enough, have made it such that I feel, yeah, like I'm discovering the potential of like what it means to create not in relation to any kind of art market, and the liberation that really brings, which is just creating more space to discover these other kinds of zones within myself that not that I wasn't aware about them before, but I think the conditions of this moment are kind of like high pressure. But the through line I think for me is always this like wandering. Yes, so wandering, knowing that I can't ever get lost. So I take the lost part back, but it's always this like wandering. Yeah.
You know, one thing that all of you are touching on, and I think Randy, in some ways Estrella, you named it most explicitly. There are two kind of things that I'm hearing where it's like on one hand, there's the kind of flow or spirit or getting lost or wandering that it's this sort of like self-guided thing, or it's like you know what's going to happen, right? But then on the other hand, there's the kind of flow or spirit or getting lost that's sort of like a thing that someone has told you to do. Um, and at least in my mind, that's like what you all have said. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, there are a lot of people who spend lots of time trying to develop practices that are about getting lost, and then they get really famous for developing those practices, and everyone else is supposed to learn those practices, and they become really famous for. So, you know, it's like one of those things is about finding yourself, quote unquote, and the other one is about sort of like outsourcing your wisdom as a mover. Um, I know that's my experience. I don't know about you all. And so I'm curious to know if you've experienced like it, how would you distinguish those things from one another in your experience? And I know that everyone here has different relationships to improv and set choreography and stuff, but even like, I think you can have, like, it's totally possible to have set choreography that just lets you live and do you. And then it's totally possible to be in an improv practice where it's like, I'm just doing this thing that someone else told me to do, and I don't relate to this at all. So I'm interested to hear how you all have experienced that distinction, how you all make it for yourselves. Yeah, and what your thoughts are on those two poles, I guess.
Can you all hear me? Is this good? All right, I took my AirPods out. I got you, miss. Okay. I was just talking to my mom about this the other day because I've been really, really fascinated. I've always been fascinated with jazz and jazz music and jazz improv. And also me, because I grew up dancing in church as what we call a praise dancer, as well as dancing in the studio. So I've always had these two worlds that I lived in as a dancer. And as a choreographer, sometimes it's hard for me to translate the movement that lives in my body into my dancers. I can pull out the best in them with their abilities, but sometimes it's hard for me to transfer the intricacies of my movement and where it's coming from into the bodies of others, if that's even possible. But there's this thing now in my spiritual upbringing called speaking in tongues that some people believe in certain churches. And it's just this language that you speak, these sounds, these phonetics that only God can understand. And then I started to equate that to my improv and movement. I have never felt free in anyone's choreography the way I feel free in my own improv, and the way I look at the movements when I'm doing it in that moment, as if only God or something very sacred can really understand what's going on in that moment. And at that time, the audience just gets to look in on that experience, but it's very sacred. I can't even repeat it. It's like when I equate it to jazz again, because, you know, a lot of the jazz musicians, some of them didn't read or write music, they play by ear. And when folks would try to, you know, record it and recreate it and write down the notes, they still couldn't make it sound like that sound. And so this idea of, you know, choreography versus improv versus the special connection, that's kind of where I lie as a mover.
I love that so much. And it actually helps me formulate a response to what Barry asked, where I think, I don't quite remember what the polls were, but your question made me think a lot about how the moments where it's kind of how I distinguish like what's going on in my dance at the level of the interiority of the dance is sort of what kind of witness is going on. Like there are moments where I'm like, oh, I nailed whatever this thing that I've been trying to nail. And all of a sudden I'll remember like, oh, a teacher who is trying to get me to learn this. So there are moments where there's that kind of witness. There have been moments where I've danced, especially like, since part of my beginnings in dance was like dancing at the club, there's a moment when you're like, oh, I suddenly feel hot, or I feel like suddenly erotic capital has accrued. And now witnessing is about a different kind of energetic exchange. And then Jade, what you were calling like this kind of relationship with something that is higher, I'm trying to find the language that I would talk about that in, because I grew up in suburban Salt Lake City with a mom who, when I was 12, converted to Christianity, which actually then made a bunch of stuff difficult for me. So the congealment of a witness into God feels kind of fraught for me. But there are moments where I've been dancing and I suddenly feel like there's another kind of witness in the room, and I actually don't know who or what this witness is. And then the process of the dance is to try to stay in that space where there's some kind of unknown witness, and to figure out like, so what is then that dynamic of dancing? Because I am watching myself, and I am also watching the emergence of something else that's watching me. And so I'm always wondering, I'm like, is that ancestral? Is that like an internal doppelganger? Am I in the matrix? But that lends a certain flavor into what I'm doing in my dance that helps me keep the movements aloft as something more than just steps that I'm doing in the space that I want to direct towards some kind of, I'm thinking it's sort of what you were talking about, some kind of capital, whether that's like the art market, whether that's institutional recognition, whether that's like flirtation. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered the question, but those are some words that came to my mind.
Maybe I can contribute. Wow, all of this is really exciting. It's very, I hope to watch the recording of this because it's very rich material. I would say dance for me is primarily it's an exploration of this midpoint between the known and the unknown. So this kind of flow state between apathy and anxiety. And it's this curiosity that's often driving me for my own well-being and thriving, as well as what's happening on a social level. So I'm very attracted to things that are or activities that are complementing something that's missing. And for me, that's been water dance, because I feel like this probably should be the oldest form of dance, and there's almost no material on this. So this has been my primary investigation. And within that, whether it's contact improvisation or water dancing, it's finding this midpoint between the known and unknown, something that is very familiar, that I've developed and have a complex experience with. And it allows me to kind of trip and to fall into the unknown in a kind of controlled manner. so that there's always this sort of unfolding fascination with the familiar. And this is happening in relationship to myself and on a social level and in nature. So I'm looking and I'm feeling, how is this all applying to the relationship with myself, and how that can complement my relationship to community and society, and how does it complement and resonate with nature? And all of those three factors are kind of the essential of whenever I'm dancing. It's I'm cultivating that. Thanks.
Yeah. Do any of the other folks here in the group, Greg, Zena, Estrella, would you like to answer this question? Because I also have another question that like bubbled up in relation, but I'll give you all a chance if you want to answer this one.
I guess okay. I'll jump in. Yeah, I think I have chosen to actively divest from like working with other choreographers for a myriad of reasons. But I feel like for me, it feels really important to be able to, like Dixon was saying, I often also sometimes when I'm preparing to move or like about to start a movement session or whatever, like I think I don't always start with an intention, but I think that I wrote down, I'm like, starting with an intention could clarify if I needed to, or if that felt like essential to kind of like identify the witness in the room. But it also brought this like imagery of the fact that like as a body that's lived for 28 years, like, there's all of that experience that I've lived through. But then, yes, I also feel like in the DNA itself, as I've been like listening to some podcasts on this, like there's so much material that is connected to ancestry and all these different lineages. And again, I'm not intentionally trying to like connect with that, but I'm getting more and more curious about, I guess, like unlocking or working with these other parts of myself. But I feel more invested in like solo work or work that I'm like, calling people into, because I feel that this, I think Barry, you mentioned that there is this like there is this vulnerability that comes with surrendering to another artist or another choreographer. And I'm realizing like, I'm someone personally who's like very, very committed to my healing process, like, a lot of trauma history. And I share that because I feel like it impacts how I choose to stand and kind of direct the energy in a room. Like I'm very hyper aware of like how I would want to be treated, and so I like do my best to like create a space in which there's room to step out, room to check in, room for discussion, room for like dissent, and it has to be this like very active site, because I do believe that this like work of dance choreography is for me, like, I mean, it's always been this like ritualistic practice, but I don't always say that in the context that I'm like weaving myself through, again, for like different reasons. But now, even with the pandemic, I'm like, yeah, solo work feels like not like safer. I'm in a time period where it feels like the most conducive to really unapologetically work with myself as a primary essence and material, on top of like the Saturn's return that's happening right now. So everything just feels like kind of like pushing me towards this growing edge of who am I really, and like what is actually moving me, like where is my agency located in my body, how do I then invite people from this place into what I'm doing. And yeah, again, just like being super intentional, like moving forward about who I'm working with, why, is there reciprocity available in this dynamic, like, and still inside all of this, like trying to get to a place of like rigorous play and rigorous care and attention.
I actually want to jump in and add it's a different question, but it continues building on this. This question of where agency is located in your body, Estrella, I think is a really crucial one for me. It feels like the axis that this discussion hinges on, at least when I think about these topics. I'm wondering if you all, it's sort of a similar question, but I feel it sort of like turning a different corner in terms of like where agency or where groundedness manifests in your body. Because I know sometimes like for some pieces, if I'm in the flow of things, it's like, yes, I'm like great at this choreography, but I don't know if I feel grounded in it, I feel like there's this sense again of like getting lost, but it's like I've been given to this witness that's not me. And then there is this kind of like getting lost or rigorous play or something that makes me feel like I have a connection to whatever it is that I'm trying to explore. I have a connection to the people who are around me. I have a connection to whatever the task is that's not about obeying somebody, you know? So I guess I kind of have two questions. I'm not sure. Answer them how you will, but where is agency like located in your body? How do you actually feel this idea of like, oh yes, I'm tapped into this thing that is like me doing what I need to do. However you would define me. It doesn't have to be like the ego me, but like it's not the obedient person, but it's like you doing what you need to do, right? How do you feel that for yourself? What does it feel like? And then also like, are there circumstances where you can just feel that it's not happening? Does that make sense? It might be kind of nebulous, but I want to like put that. I want to go like boop like that and see what that does. Mm-hmm.
I think I have something to say that connects the two questions, so I'm going to jump in before I lose the thread, the necklace. It has to do with agency, and it has to do with like losing yourself inside of something. And I think it has to do with different ways of working, but let's see, how do I say this? I've been in processes where I feel like I have a ton of agency inside a very set movement, and I've been able to make that set movement my own. And usually it's because I have a long-standing relationship with the choreographer, and I'm not just like coming in and like give me the moves. I've also had like an incredible lack of agency when I've developed movement through an improvisation that meant a lot to me, and then that got mapped onto other dancers, or it got twisted in a different way. Actually, Barry, you were part of this process. It got moved in a different way, reorganized. You were not leading the process, obviously. So I think agency is a really interesting question, because there's the question of like, how do we find ourselves inside of someone else's structure? And then also, what do we do when someone takes something from the inside, or not the inside, but like something from our spirits that we've made and then uses it for another purpose? So that's kind of like a complicated, like a pulling one thing and does this. But I think I feel agency inside of really set structures in my like inner shit starter trait, like finding the trap door inside of the thing that I can get out of. And then that reminded me of the losing yourself question, because I think when I'm in a process, I work a lot with disorientation. I write about disorientation. I study disorientation. I do other people's disorientations. Like, it's super dangerous not to have an in and an out. Like, it's super dangerous not to know how you're going to leave. And sometimes we don't leave the dance when we leave the studio, or we leave the dance space, or whatever it is. So this was something that Nia Love sensitized me to. She was talking about Rara and Vodun, and how there's like the crossroads marks the in and the out of this experience of, like a trance state or something. But I think a lot of like secular postmodern practices, be they a contact jam or, you know, some other kind of authentic movement, I don't know, like some other kind of process where you're kind of working with different constellations of senses and experience, having an in and an out, having a like foreplay and aftercare, having like whatever it is, whatever are the ways that you can have an ability to enter, exit feels really important to agency. And I think I feel that on like the little hairs on me, and I feel it in my tailbone, and I feel it in my, yeah, like just my orienting reflexes. But yeah, it's, I love the question because like the structure doesn't really determine the agency. I feel like for me, the relationship to what's happening determines the agency, my agency. Yeah, and then sorry, I just one more thing. I'm trying to acknowledge my teachers more. And I've been like embarrassed to admit this, but I have like a ton of ballet training. And my ballet teacher, we never had set choreography, and we inherited roles from other middle schoolers and high schoolers who made the choreography, and they didn't have set roles, and we would just kind of absorb the roles. So I feel like she worked really hard to keep our agency intact. We were encouraged to deviate from the timing, to not arrive together in the combinations. So it was a real shock when I was in other people's processes and my input wasn't really wanted, and like whether or not I thought the step went. So yeah, I think that just informs my relationship to agency, and that like it was inbuilt for the first 18 years of my life that of course I was going to have a lot of agency over what was happening. Our costumes were improvisational, like it was sort of a free for all. But yeah, I just want to name Margaret Bisegli in Weston, Connecticut, teaching out of her house, as someone who sort of made it impossible for me to give up my agency inside of a dance context. And I'm realizing from the question that that's very much not taken for granted.
Stina, I feel that response on such a visceral level, because when Barry was posing the question, what I thought of was like, oh, if the sort of line of words is agency, groundedness, I think the one that becomes so important for me is safety. So like if I feel safe in a choreography, let me backtrack. So the other thing that you said was like, what do you do when you've given your spirit over in something that you've made and then you see it turn into something else that you didn't consent to? And I was thinking about it and I was like, of all of the times I've been in somebody's dance piece, I have only ever sort of opened spirit once. And that was because I felt so safe with the choreographer. And through knowing this choreographer for a while, I was like, oh, I vibe with you. I get that, like, I sort of have a sense of what your piece is trying to explore. I see how you've set it up in terms of dance lineages, in terms of a question. And I think it's interesting, and I'm with you on this. And that's only ever happened one time. But in like a lot of other cases, it's like, if I feel as if the process doesn't actually have a safe exit place or a place where I can say no to something, I'm not actually really in the process. And then as I'm in there, I'm sort of like, okay, well, let me take this as a pedagogical experience somehow. Let me take this as a moment where I figure out what is dance, how people do choreography so I can not do it. But I would actually say that so much of my experience, especially in like the postmodern concert dance world, has profoundly been about not having agency and then negotiating. So what am I getting out of this experience then if I'm here without any kind of options to open the valves of spirit or the valves of curiosity? Because there is something interesting going on here. It's actually just somewhat indifferent to me.
I have a lot of half thoughts. I don't know if any of them will find completion if I open my mouth, but I'll try anyways. Yeah, agency is a weird word for me. Yeah, I mean, I quit dancing for the like in Give Me Moves, and I will do them on stage for an audience quite abruptly, like 12 years ago when I was like 26, and I was with some choreographer, and I was supposed to, I walked on a stage and handstand and like rolled to my chest, and like this resounding voice was like, why? Like, just because my body can do these things, I personally don't find this important at all. And I know if someone does, so they should probably be doing this. And so I just was like, well, then what, like, what? And so, that's one. My agency has nothing to do with my capacity or my facility. Or at least not in, if I want to go that route, like I started doing sex work directly afterwards, because like, well, okay, well, like if I have an impressive facility, which you keep telling me in the lobby, like here's my hourly rate. And that felt a lot more honest to me, just for me. And so then I started being like, okay, well, why am I asking for anyone to watch me, period? Like, I hope to God it's not because I can point my foot. And like, so I started going deeper into different folk dances and started remembering when I saw dance when I was young, because I didn't grow up dancing. I grew up, my mom was a belly dancer, my dad was a boxer, so I grew up fighting. And so also dance around my house was a way. When I was younger, I had a lot of trouble being in my body. Like that like beautiful Shavasana feeling was like 90% of my day. So like dance was a way to like actually figure out where my fingers were in relation to like the oven. And so like dance was a defense mechanism, not something to like show what my brain is thinking. And so like agency was something about basically being able to be in my body without harming myself, or a safe way to like have parameters to exist in it that felt like my ability to hold a lot of things that didn't feel like they were my own was useful to something, as opposed to just like discombobulating. And for the sake of like grounding or parameters, what Zena was talking about, slightly, I can't remember your exact words, but yeah, like I don't know the choreography. Even if I have a set choreography, it usually changes the second I'm on stage. But even if I really try to hold to it, it doesn't work. But like I must anoint my feet every time before I go on stage, and like I must take a shower afterwards. Like those are like the two things that I'm like, okay, like these things have to happen. If I can do that, then whatever else happens on stage, like that's none of my business. I'll just do the work. But like that's all I have on that.
I would say to your question, I feel connected or grounded when my womb and my center is connected. When my womb, my pelvis is not connected, then I am just dancing externally, but I'm not interconnected, which is confusing because I didn't have the agency. Dance was very violent for me growing up in the background that I came from. So I was in two worlds. In the studio setting, we were getting shoes thrown at us. So we had to get the step right. I remember being 7 and mama, you gotta get me to dance on time, because if I'm late, I'm doing push-ups or, that. So it was very strict in that way. But then in church, we had to be fully covered and we couldn't show too much skin and I couldn't be sensual in a way. So I grew up very confused as a mover, that I could perform well, but was never really interconnected until I started doing my own research. And so oftentimes agency, and it's something I don't struggle with, but I go back and forth when I'm working with other dancers in choreography or just myself. Sometimes I can mask with movement because I'm not doing the inner work. So much of the work that I need and ask from my dancers and myself is this internal conversation and connectedness that I need. And I can make them move all day because then I'm trying to perform of the expectation of like maybe what the audience will want, or before, just trying to have movement, but the inner work, this that sometimes cause the work to simplify, or to I think Ann Carlson said this in one of our composition classes at UCLA. Sometimes it's not about what you want, but what the dance needs. Like when you look at the dance and you sit back and you may want to do 20,000 backflips and hit the split and lay out whatever, if that's what you want, but maybe it just needs a walk at that moment. Maybe you're looking at the work, looking at the internal conversations that happening with the dancers. And so then it goes back to me, that idea of like ministry and importance. And like I mentioned earlier, the piece I did over the summer with the Black women superheroes, all of the dancers were my childhood friends. And so it was important for them to feel empowered and to use movements that they can feel like that they could conquer, because conquering and defeating something in the process is super important for me. And the idea of empowering the spirit of the movers in the space is like, I want to give them movements that challenge them, but also that they can tackle. So then that when they do the movement, when they do the thing, when I do the thing, then I leave empowered because I know that I have conquered that physically and spiritually.
I would just want to add, I mean, I'm feeling shook right now, but I think Gregory mentioned, I think, a question, something along the lines of like, why am I asking people to even watch me in the first place? And I realize I'm like, oh damn, like, is there somehow a dependence that I have between like what I'm doing and being witnessed? Like, do I feel like for me, when I'm being witnessed, there is a different kind of unfolding that happens like in the context of performing. But I think even now, again, like becoming a witness to myself, I think also becomes a practice in and of itself. But I think that question, I'm just going to keep asking myself that question, and somehow it connects to like I feel agency in a space or in my body when I feel like I can fully give myself permission. And this is still something that I'm like working through and kind of unlocking for myself, exactly what these conditions are that allow for that. But it's somehow like being able to arrive exactly where I'm at, and not and like that's enough. Like I don't have to that me as a starting point like is enough. And yeah, I guess maybe that's just like a like a mantra that I have to keep repeating, like that I am enough, and this is the kind of energy that propels the work and the space forward. And if I don't feel that, or if the facilitator of the space is kind of like demanding that something happen that doesn't allow for me to feel spacious, then there's like it becomes almost like this weird like militaristic sensation. And then I'm like, then this to me is not like, quote unquote dance. This is like it feels similar to like being conditioned or programmed in a specific kind of way. And I'm just like not interested in that anymore. I'm like, actually, like there's already enough of that I have to like undo and unpack. And so yeah, the agency for me is it moves around and depends on the day and depends on the context and geographic context and otherwise. But yeah, it's a powerful question.
Oh my gosh, this question is like a grape, like a juicy grape, and it's like, give me another grape, give me another grape, but like soon the juice will keep running, so we have to like contain the juice, start pulling the train into the station. But what I'm also Estrella, like I'm also like shook listening to these answers, because like what is emerging for me is a few different things. One is this idea is like, it doesn't matter what the form is, Doesn't matter if it's ballet, doesn't matter if it's some kind of improvisation, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's not about the form, but the way that people are asked to relate to it. Um, Either themselves to the form or like other people amongst themselves or dancers to the choreographer, right? So this idea of relation being something important, being aware of what your dancing is doing for other people. Are you asking people to do shapes or inhabit a thing that you somehow feel is important, but the dancers aren't convinced? Or are you giving them an opportunity to invest and find their own relationship to this material, right? I think the other thing that's really standing out for me on a number of different levels is this idea of the inside and outside, right? So the idea of or groundedness and agency, perhaps, if we use that word, coming from a sense of being grounded and being able to orient yourself within a process. Um, Being able to feel that physically, thinking about the womb, thinking about the pelvis, thinking about the ground, right? But also this idea of like the inside and the outside of a process, right? So how are you asking people to enter a process? What are you asking them to do inside of it? Um, and then how are you, I think of like the benediction at a church, like how are you giving them grace to then like leave and not feel like, damn, I left all that stuff in the studio and I can't get it back, right? So there's that inside and outside. The last inside and outside I'm thinking about, and this will be our last question, is the inside of something called dance and the outside. When I think about my own experience with agency in dance and the different practices that I've been involved in, and some of this has come up in these last responses, sometimes I think, dance really can't give me the thing that I'm looking for. And Greg, you also talked about this a little bit, like maybe dance can't give me the thing that I'm looking for. I know that everyone has their own relationship to that question. Some people are like, dance is where it's at. I don't need to do anything else. And then there's some folks who are like, maybe I should just start doing this thing called performance. Maybe I should become a teacher. Maybe I should like actually become an activist and saying, instead of saying like I'm doing activism, but really I'm just doing like a concert series. They can be related, but they're not the same thing. Um, but I think we have to be critical about what is the inside and the outside of dance, right? Because it's one thing to say that I'm using my dance to do. Anyway, I'm getting the message to stop because I'm getting off track. How do you all relate to this inside and outside of dance? For you, are you like, dance is what I need to do, and I am finding what I need to do in dance in terms of agency and grounding? Or maybe I'm feeling like there's something beyond dance that's the thing. Or maybe it's something in between. I'll leave that there.
I mean, I think I've made the joke with you before. It's like, dance is the only thing getting in the way of the dances I want to make. Is this like the obligation to choreograph a score, or which I've always end up believing is a front anyways. And it's like the movement itself isn't hindering to what I'm trying to get at. And like, how'd I say it? I don't know if it's a departure though. It's like I've been thinking a lot over the past couple of years, especially a lot in the last year for some reason, of like why I danced before I thought there would ever be a stage. Because like I said, I didn't grow up dancing, but I always danced, and it's like I still danced in my room. I still danced for like all my dead relatives. I danced at parks. Like there was always an electric slide going on the weekend. Like, and this idea that like people weren't dancing, there wasn't an inside outside in this, like in my head for a very long time. And I think the window where I thought that there was like a set outside and that my role was different, lasted a couple of years. And so I'm answering this having literally no answers about what it means. I just know that like, you know what? I don't have any more worries, so I'm going to mute myself and possibly pick back up. Someone else talk.
I mean, I'll fill the silence. I'm actually someone who started dancing late in life. I remember as like a really young child, I told my parents, like, I really want to do gymnastics. And I think immediately this activated all of these kind of like gender discipline anxieties of conservative immigrant parents. And so I remember asking this when I was like 3 or 4, probably after watching like the Pink Power Ranger. And the next thing I knew, I was forced to play classical piano for 10 years. um, and like the first kind of art form I was practicing out of desire just for myself was actually writing and poetry. And in college, and Barry and I went to the same place, Princeton, at a certain moment, like the kind of poetry atmosphere just gave me nothing anymore. And I was like, I need to have some kind of engagement with the self that isn't just the self that has to be professionalized, figure out how to present myself respectably in social circles. And so that's kind of how I happened into dance. So I think for me, knowing that like dance was this thing I had to find when the other stuff wasn't doing it, made me really conscious about like trying to never have to turn for dance to make a living. Like at a certain moment, I like chose to do a PhD instead of trying to go into the freelance dance world, because I could just tell like the anxiety I'm going to have over having enough food to feed myself is going to ask me to do the 5, 6, 7, 8 for people that I don't want to do. And as like a queer, non-binary person of color, I was like, my body has experienced way too much forcible performance and violence. And so I would rather not have to do any more of that. And I guess this is maybe just says something to me personally about where I am at in terms of dance. There are moments when I'm like, oh, I'm not a dancer. Because I'm not accruing the CV lines. I'm not always choreographing things. I'm so much more process oriented than product oriented, which means sometimes I don't even know how to explain to people that I am a dancer. But somehow that sort of is how I dance, is continuously trying to find the way that it stays the dance instead of like a product that does something for somebody else or even for me.
When we're talking about, like, to your question about the inner work and outer work, I've been reading a lot about like Afrofuturism, and one of the questions that was asked was, do you ever think that we would get to outer space? And if we were to get to outer space, what would the movement look like? But then there was a deeper question about, these ideas of we living in two worlds, as a Black woman, as Black as woman. However, so then there's this inner space where I work in and I can be anything I want to be. I can create my own worlds. I can create my own movement. I can give myself agency. And then there's this outer space that I live in that I'm just, a Black woman. I'm in society. I have to live in these societal norms if I choose to. I have these roles I have to play. So I'm really constantly, the inner space for me, the freeness where I can create and be connected is this inner space. It's this internal conversation. It's my creative practice. And outer space for me is just how I have to navigate through being in America, but I would say what COVID though has shown me, and I already was a interdisciplinary artist. I was already walking in multiple forms, but if dance was taken away from me and if I couldn't go into a rehearsal space again if I couldn't perform in front of an audience again, how can you still do your thing? And so it's stripped. I used to be scared to just step totally away from dance. And when I say dance, it's just concert dance. Will always be a mover. But I was scared to separate myself from that because so much of my existence up until then had been connected to being a dancer or being a choreographer. But now I'm like, I just need whatever is going to help the vision come to pass that I see, whether it's film, whether it's writing, whether it's painting. I'm going to do that thing because it's no longer art to me. It's just the work. Like, I just want to do the work. And it's not so precious because right now, the world turned upside down. Let me know that it's really just about doing the thing, doing the work, at least for me.
And I'd love to jump in and resonate with that, where I also feel kind of called to allow the form in which I'm doing what I'm doing to shift radically, even if I don't have the necessary like skills yet to to do what I'm imagining. I'm still like there is liberation and freedom that I sense within me when I'm like, okay, I can also, like, me as a human being right now, like I'm radically changing and putting in a lot of time, energy, and resources into repatterning myself. And then I'm like, of course, then that means that like the form that my work takes will have to inevitably like reflect that. Like there's gonna be a bridge that goes back and forth. But when you pose the question, Barry, I felt like immediately the word that came to mind was like borders, and like who gets like, the conversation around like what gets to be considered dance, and what doesn't get to be considered dance, and like street dance and ethnic dance, and like those labels that like honestly are like a hot mess. But then to that reveal that there's even still within this like so-called, like, I don't know, field that maybe is like supposed to be like embracing, somehow becomes also like very policing in terms of who gets to dance, and the connections to privilege and all of that. But I also wanted to echo that there's the reality that Jade was sharing of like living in the United States, within my own body and positionality, like that. I feel like there's a part of me that right now, like literally, I'm like, I mean, I trust that I can do the work anywhere, but there's like a part of me at my core that's like, maybe it's actually, maybe this, maybe the infrastructure of this country, like we know what that is, but I'm like, is that holding me back from doing the work? Like, am yeah, this is like a question that sort of appeared this week, and like imagining like what it would be like to be somewhere else, not to like bypass or to like run away from the place that I was born in. But there's a lot of like, if I am calling in that I want to move towards my liberation, I think it also means in many ways, like, again, this question of like divestment from the structures that are clearly very visibly right now within the pandemic, yet have always existed, like illuminating all of the inequities and being like, okay, like, can I, if I want the work that I believe in and that I trust is powerful and can create social change, like maybe I have to shift, or maybe something inside of me has to shift, but or maybe both. And so again, I feel like I'm allowing my body to become porous to information, so that the work is inspired by like many different things. But even as soon as I step out the door, I'm like, there's like an immediate boundary where I'm like, oop, this reality is like it's so hard for like it not like so hard like it's impossible, but there's like a hardness to it that I'm like, shit, like I want to get to know the people who are in this fucking building, but there's something that gets in the way of even that. And that's layered, but yeah, the permission to cross borders, going back to that.
I'm just sorry, I'm just still soaking it in through. So I've really like tortured myself with the question of will I keep dancing? And will the conditions allow me to keep dancing? Like I asked myself that in college, after college, when I decided to do a PhD. I literally like lost sleep over it. And I think the fear around that comes from the fact that there's a person that I am when I'm dancing that I haven't found another way of being that person. I've come close. There's many like, it's not like bifurcated. But I've also come to feel that like dancing for me is just the decision that I'm dancing like right now. Period. And B, I can leave that perspective and I have during the pandemic, like in a way kind of left it dormant. But every time I come back, everything that I've done like goes into the junk drawer and comes out again in the dancing. So like I'm like out of it, but I'm not out of it. And like it's there if I need it, and it's there if I want to go back, and it's there whether or not I'm moving. And yeah, that's been something that I'm coming to that's helpful for me, whether or not it's true, but it's a relationship to what's happening. And just deeply appreciating everything that's being shared. And I feel weird like coming after that, coming after what's been said and spoken in the room. But another thing that came to mind is just like how much I miss dancing with people as like the obvious thing, but this is increasing the longing.
I just want to take a few moments of silence. That I'm so grateful for the five of you being here and for everyone who's here right now, because I feel in my heart that the things that we have thought about and discussed together have like honored all the stuff that I named at the beginning, and I think it's a blessing to have you all here together. I encourage you all to take one more breath for yourselves. Thank you all so much. I love and appreciate all of you, both the panelists and everyone who is here listening. It is literally 5 p.m., which God's timing is always perfect. So this is time for a break. Do whatever you want for this next hour. I encourage you to come back at 6 o'clock, where the folks who've been sitting out wherever you are will get a chance to talk with other folks who've been here. So take this hour. You can stay logged into Zoom. You can log out, but the same Zoom link will get you back here at 6 p.m. So thank you all. I will see you.